We're live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to day 4 of Cycle 2015. We have with us now our amazing Grace. Grace is a wonderful person. She's a cycle student from last year who took to heart many of the things we talked about and has been embracing new entrepreneurial paths in her own life. And in addition, she's been a wonderful help getting this whole cycle program going and organized. I would not have had time to do it this year without Grace's help. So it's Thanksgiving, Grace. I'm going to give you another big thank you for all your help this year. And maybe I'm making you a little bit shy. I'm sorry, but I'm just so grateful that I have to say thank you again. And with that, I'll step out of the way and let you with us now. Our amazing Grace. Grace is a wonderful person. She's a cycle student from last year who took to heart many of the things we talked about and has been embracing new entrepreneurial paths in her own life. And in addition, she's been a wonderful help getting this whole cycle program going and organized. I would not have had time to do it this year without Grace's help. So
I'm having a slight technical
Grace.
difficulty
I'm going to give you
here.
another big thank you for all your help this year.
Okay. Sorry about that, you guys. I had 2 windows open at the same time, and I was hearing Lobo's introduction twice. I think I've got that under control. Lobo, thank you so much. As it concerns cycle, it has been an extreme pleasure working with you and the team in organizing this year's cycle. So I can't thank you enough for the pleasure of that experience. So let me just say hi to everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming, and happy Thanksgiving to those of you in the US. I want to just start out by saying that I condensed my 10 things to 5 things. So these are the 5 things I learned from quitting my job and starting my own business. So I was a mid-careerist when I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I left the security of a good job and a somewhat certain future mid-career to start my own business, which meant that my path to entrepreneurialism was not a very straight one. At the time, I was working in the land development industry in Southern California on sexy real estate projects that had construction budgets that were easily in the high 7 figures, and for which I was responsible for negotiating approvals. So, as you might imagine, the stakes were pretty high. High stakes meant fierce competition between me and my peers, and that meant I had to work twice as hard and twice as smart as everyone else. Being ambitious, that's exactly what I did, and in the process, I helped my clients prosper. Good for my clients, good for me. I was on my way to becoming a partner in my firm and a leading authority in the industry. I had a bright future. The system was working. But I could not shake loose the nagging evidence that I was working too hard for too little. I started thinking in terms of return on investment. Despite a nice salary, I was burning the candle from both ends. For the amount of brain power, blood, sweat, and tears that I was investing in my work, I needed a better return. But I struggled for a long time. It was easier to stay on the current path and let inertia carry me than it was to make the effort to change it. Who had the energy to change things? I didn't think I did. In truth, however, my day-to-day existence was far from easy. I was already expending a great deal of energy, just in the wrong place. I needed to redirect that energy. I was so entrenched, however, in my life as it was, that I knew the only way I was going to be able to change things was if I changed my day-to-day environment altogether, removing all influences outside of my own. My idea of how best to do this was to go to where I best understood the natives, where I could relax and chill. In my case, being a Francophile, that was Paris. So I told my boss I needed a break, took a sabbatical from my job, and planted myself in the best place I knew to recalibrate my 6 senses, which had been dulled from years of neglect, from ignoring my inner voice that would not stop harassing me to make a move. And thus began my journey from employee to entrepreneur, through a series of lessons that I would learn as I traveled through time with the intention of constructing a life in which I could thrive. The move to Paris was, of course, a physical separation, an exercise in uprooting. But more than that, it was a prelude to what would become an inner shift. The physical move for me greased the mental wheels for a greater letting go. Conformity, the status quo, disappointment. Away from the noise, I began to understand the nature of attachments and how being attached to things kept me from arriving at real prosperity. That was my first lesson, to free my mind, as Jeffrey Tucker explained in his talk yesterday. Attachments are things like disappointment, frustration, expectations, fear. Fear is a big one, the granddaddy of all attachments. Fear enables paralysis, disappointment, excuses. It becomes a way of life, blocks all that is good and productive. It's okay to be afraid. It's a survival mechanism, but it helps to know what it is you're afraid of. Is it real? Is the sky going to fall? Because if the sky is going to fall, I'd say, yeah, be afraid. But if it's not, then stop worrying, stop obsessing, stop blocking. This was how I learned to let go of my attachments. Every time I felt fear, my fancy job was going away because they didn't like me being in Paris, or I was going to become irrelevant, or how on earth was I going to blah, 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 fill in the blank. There was always something. And for me, the big tell, the sign, was the tightness at the back of my neck that would suddenly grip me at the thought of something fearful. Just thinking made me anxious. That had to stop. But I did not one day wake up and quit attachments. I had to make it a practice. And the way I did this was to do the thing that made me afraid. And every time I did that and the sky didn't fall, I grew more confident that I wasn't going to die. Knowing that you're not going to die is important. It puts things in perspective. Knowing instead you're going to thrive is like winning the lottery. The more I let go of my fears and my other attachments, both in small and large measure, the more my universe expanded. The better I could see. Like when you're driving and you clean your windshield, suddenly the full landscape of what's before you is before you in panoramic view. Getting rid of the muck, letting go of attachments, of paradigms that weren't working in my true best interest, brought clarity. And this in turn allowed me to see the opportunities that would naturally present themselves that I had made room for. Letting go of attachments became a way of life. And over time, I became a better person. Not in any moral sense, but in an operative, functional sense. My inner compass lit up and started to spring into action, aligning itself with my true north. I became impervious to external influences that had nothing to do with who I was. This state of consciousness and awareness is where I found my center. And from here, all things are possible. So, how do I turn possibility into reality? By acting with intention. Using my emotions as goalposts, as Lobo described in his talk on Life 101, if you align yourself with yourself, the path becomes clear. This was the second thing I learned. By letting go of stuff, I had made room for a different reality, one that I would construct. What was I going to do? Up to that point in my life, I was very good at not knowing what it was I didn't want, which is a very passive way to live. But I was not practiced at knowing what it was I wanted, because up until then, I was following the formula, education, job, etc., etc. I needed to initiate. But what? Good thing I had made some room in my head, because everyone has an idea, more or less, about what they really want to do. It's somewhere inside of you, inside all of us, a wish, a dream, a desire maybe, the thing that lights you up when you think about it, but that maybe you dismiss as a bad idea because it's not practical, possible, probable, or so your fear tells you. It tells you that, but that's the thing to do. That thing is inspiration. For me, it was the idea of migrating to a distant place. I was now back in LA. I had migration in my blood. My father was a great migrator, and I wanted to end my status as a commodity, as an employee. So I focused on those two things, to move to a place where I saw opportunity and to own a business. I didn't know yet what kind of business, but I had ideas. I assigned my ideas to lists and used my lists to reason out a plan. Within a year, I had raised $4 million and moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where I had found a business that I bought that met all of my requirements. Once in Charleston, as a business owner, I was surprised at how not incredibly difficult that all was. What that taught me, what I learned, was that at every step, the vision that you allow yourself to envision gets clearer. And that as long as you continue to act with intention and with confidence in your abilities, keeping your inspiration and focus, the answers will come. How could they not? And this is how I changed the inertia of the status quo. how I broke the wheel of power that Lobo describes in his talk in the Game of Thrones. Which brings me to the third thing I learned. You are the source. You are the source. I just want to say that twice. Starting your own business is a creative process, both in terms of the business and of the self. In my case, leading from a place of inspiration opened the creative floodgates. I now had to force myself to go to sleep every night, where before I had to force myself to wake up. In moments when I resisted inspiration and operated instead from a place of fear, the floodgates would close. It was that simple. Inspiration results in a fuller recruitment and expression of the senses and of the faculties. What was even more interesting and life-changing was that where before I was evolving with every career challenge that I experienced as an employee, through which the world would form me, I was now the one forming the world. And in that process, I experienced an energetic shift that grew more and more profound. Being frequently inspired, I was now the source. I was the source of ideas put into action and of plans and constructions that pointed me towards prosperity. But more importantly, being regularly inspired and self-directed, responding to internal cues as opposed to external influences, I became the source of my emotional equanimity, which allowed me to thrive in a much deeper sense. Being in a regular state of animation bred more inspiration, inspiring also those around me. This seemed to be a natural side effect, which in turn engendered a culture of creative output, of action versus reaction, producing an entrepreneurial environment rooted in authenticity, authority, and ascendancy. As I traveled through time, powered by my own luminosity, I found collaborators of all shapes and sizes. This is the fourth thing I learned. Throughout your journey of entrepreneurialism and basically life 101, you will have collaborators. It's unavoidable. When I was first starting, I thought this was going to be a journey of one. It was all up to me and me alone. While this is true, the opposite is also true. Resources and human capital, the collective skills, knowledge, and other intangible assets of other individuals like you, intent on creating their own economic value in the world, eventually meet up with you, because that's what they're doing. They're finding you. My job was to know what it was I needed, to wear that purpose on my sleeve, to put it out there, and then to recognize it when I found it. This happened so often that over time, I stopped stressing over how things would work out, gradually learning to live with the discomfort of not having immediate answers to whatever problem might be at hand, learning painfully at times that answers often came in stages, in layers, and more pointedly, that answers often came in a restatement of the problem, or even better, as a reframing of the problem as the answer. Over time, and after even more pain, from resisting when I should have been reframing, discomfort gave way to equanimity. This was a major breakthrough. Since I was expected to have all the answers, whether in direct regard to the value I was bringing to market, or in some fashion indirectly related in my sphere of collaborators with employees, associates, providers of goods and services, etc., being comfortable with not immediately having the answers was a major shift. While yes, I was the source, I knew the answers didn't only flow out of me. Knowing that answers were always in reach, however, having that confidence created the space to make room for the people that would help me make that reach. And this was the next thing that I learned, to value people. My greatest collaborators were the people I valued most at all levels of contribution. That's because people, for the most part, want to create value, and they want to enjoy the validation of that value that they create. My job was to recognize their contribution or the potential for their contribution. Sometimes there was no contribution to be made, and I needed to know that too. What does it mean to value people? It means that you recognize the importance, relevance, or usefulness of their contributions, that you respect the fact that they have a meaningful contribution to make. By valuing people, you have them at hello. And if you have a team of such people working together, productivity flourishes, and the impossible becomes possible. Valuing people came more easily to me when I, myself, became more open and receptive to other people's realities, not necessarily the other way around. Being receptive to other people's realities creates the space for affinities, whether by resonance and harmony, or by accord and understanding, or by empathy and sympathy. These affinities in turn become powerful drivers of creativity and productivity and cooperation, basically. This, I have to say, is my biggest takeaway from owning and running my own business and learning to lead people in fulfillment of my responsibilities and commitments. Every day I strive to see the value in the people that I come across, whether as a blip in my life, like the person who's bagging my groceries, or as someone more profoundly meaningful, like the investor who's reading my next business plan. Because in some way and in some fashion, most of the people in our lives, in their way, make our lives better. And with that, I'll close my short presentation and just say one thing to sum it all up. And that's that being self-possessed, leading through inspiration, and acting with intention and full gratitude of life and the people in your life changes everything. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Grace. That was a wonderful talk. And my head is spinning because you threw out so many concepts so quickly. But I think it's maybe something I want to encourage people, particularly people for whom English is not their first language. Go back and watch this again. If you watch the recording, you can hit pause. And I'm not criticizing you, Grace. You did a wonderful job. You spoke clearly and not too quickly. I should slow down as you did. But just because it was really packed full of ideas that are, each one of which is sort of a tip of an iceberg kind of idea. One that comes to mind is attachment. And I know that you use that in a specific way. And I think we're going to get some questions coming in here. People are typing, but why don't you talk a little bit about attachment while people are typing?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, over time, and obviously I have enough experience in life to have experienced failures in everything, personal, work, professional, and it was through a close examination of how those failures came about that I realized that it came out of an entrenchment or an attachment in an idea, in an expectation, and things that once I started practicing letting go of them, that I realized it changed the environment in which I could go through life. So I think I pointed out earlier that fear or fear enables a lot of things. It keeps you from your goals, and it ends up being an excuse for not doing things. And I wanted to break that, and I did. And it's definitely a practice, and I encourage everyone, if they have something that they're thinking about doing, to just take a moment to think about it honestly with themselves, and take baby steps maybe in conquering whatever it is, those fears or those attachments, and sort of in terms of what reality they're expecting to see, how that might change.
I really liked what you had to say about confronting your fears. If you're not too shy, can I ask you for an example? Like you said, the way to fight your fears was to find something you were afraid of and do that thing. Is there one that you're willing to share as an example?
Well, I definitely had the fear of leaving what was a very good job with, you know, the golden handcuffs, if you will. I was getting close to knowing that if I kept on my path, I was going to be someone in Los Angeles, and that's not a small thing. And I thought, but I was so unhappy with my day-to-day. I didn't necessarily like the work I was doing. It was challenging, but it wasn't inspiring, and I knew that. And so, but I was afraid financially. Well, how am I going to make a living? And what am I going to do? And I just ultimately, for me, I actually got sick. I got sick from stress, and and that kind of lit up a light bulb.
That's interesting. Very good. Thank you very much. So we do have a question. So Evaldos wants to know, when did you know or feel that you were capable of starting a business? Was it before you did it, or was it afterwards? Or after.
Afterwards.
So
in a sense, it was a little bit of stubbornness, of kind of just talking myself through it, going, all right, you know, I was, like I said, I was good at not knowing what I wanted. So I knew I didn't want to be an employee again. I knew I didn't want to be a commodity. So I knew that much. And I knew I had skills, and I knew I had skills I could market that were marketable, and I knew that I could apply those skills. And this is where I think having a job is a good thing, because you learn a lot and you build a good skill set. And so being very strong-willed and knowing I didn't want to be an employee, I didn't want to work for other people anymore, is what fueled me. And so I just started taking the steps. As I mentioned, I made my lists, and I started scratching away at that list. And every time I did, I met a goal. And the vision started coming to fruition. And that kept encouraging me. So it built upon itself. And then one day I was in Charleston, South Carolina with my business, and I thought, well, what took me so long?
That's wonderful. We have fans of your phrase, the golden handcuffs. And I'm wondering, did that come with a golden parachute when you left? Were you able to take some capital with you to finance the Paris adventure?
Very much so, yes. And I did finance part of my venture with my money I had saved.
Mm-hmm. And did you do anything in Paris, like professionally, or you just go and decompress and get back in touch with your soul, as it were?
It was getting back in touch with my soul. I actually did nothing in Paris, except to get myself a beautiful apartment in the left bank, make friends, and hang out with Parisians. I think I did one thing that was structured, and that was I took salsa dancing classes, and that was it.
That's wonderful. Can you tell us? Can you tell us a little bit more about your list and making those lists and what goes on the list? How do you work through the lists?
So good question. I'm a terrible list maker, because I'll make 20 lists and then they're all around the house, and then I have to go find them. But you know, the advent of technology makes that easier now. So I can keep one list on my laptop, and they're everywhere on each device. But back then I didn't have that. So I kind of made scratch pad lists, and I kept them simple. So the lists were just very general. In my case, I had those two broad goals. I wanted to leave Los Angeles, and I made lists of places that I'd like to visit, that I'd like to live in, and types of businesses that I thought I might enjoy owning. And then I took those lists and I started exploring. So I would take trips. I would go visit cities. And then I would get on the phone and I would talk to, and in my instance, I bought a business that was already in existence. I would talk to business brokers and I would go visit businesses. And then I would do business plans based on what I was finding, and I would think about things, and I would do a lot of soul searching. And it wasn't that difficult, because I was actually surprised how easily those two things came together. And interestingly enough, the Charleston one, I was in Charleston to look at a different business, and then I was getting ready to leave to come back to Los Angeles when another broker I had been working with called and said, "You're in Charleston because I have a business for you." And so it was a very last minute accident that brought me eventually to the business I bought.
That's a great story. We have some time, so I'm going to jump in here on this list topic. I'll mention in my own journey along these lines, I also came up with the list technology, if you will. It's not really a technology, but it's just it's more than just a trick. It's a life structuring mechanism. And what I used to do was very, very simple. I just got a yellow legal pad of paper, and with a pencil, I'd make a list of everything that I had to do. And then I would prioritize them. I would say, what's the most important thing on this list, and put a 1 by it, and just go and work through until everything was numbered. And then I would do number 1 first. And it's amazing how something so simple just radically changed my effectiveness in life. Because you wake up, you get your coffee or your newspaper, you do whatever you do, and maybe you get to the most important thing on your list, maybe you don't. Maybe there's more fun or interesting things that you want to do, and you can get to the end of the day and not do the one thing that was really the most important on your list. And even if you don't get all the way through your list, if you work through them in priority, then at least you know that the most important thing you had to do, you got done that day. And this one simple thing just completely changed the effectiveness that I was achieving in my own life. So I'm now, I would say I still do the same thing, but I don't write it down anymore. It's automatic. It's become a mental habit where I get up, I get my cup of tea, and my brain starts sorting through the different things that I have on my plate. Mm-hmm. And I know, I mean, if you think about it, you know what really is important.
Right.
And that's where I focus.
We definitely get better at it. And what I found surprising about lists is it's interesting how the things that are at the top of your list can sometimes end up at the bottom. The thing that you thought was going to be the thing or the most important thing,
yes.
Yeah, suddenly.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. There would be sometimes something would be like a top priority, and I just didn't get to it, and I didn't get to it, and I didn't get to it. And after a week, you have to say, you know, I keep not getting to this. Is this really as important as I thought it was?
Right.
Well, that's terrific. We have another question about how you found the funds to buy a business. Was it just savings, or?
I actually went the conventional, traditional route. I found the funds two ways. Savings, I found a partner, and together we got a bank loan. So we financed.
Are you willing to mention the levels of that? Was it like 50% financing, or?
It was, let me think about it. Was more than 50% financing. $4 million. Say it was like 60, 70% financing.
Wow, well, that's terrific. This is really interesting, and I hope people watching this take note of this number, and thank you for sharing that. 60 to 70% financing. This means that Grace, with her resume, her experience, her ideas, and her partner, was able to convince a banker to give her most of the money, and not even just 51%, but a large part of the pie of most of the money to buy this business and see that as a good deal. Yeah. So it really emphasizes the intellectual capital that you brought to the table. You didn't just go out and buy it out of your pocket. Somebody actually gave you most of the money because they were willing to believe you and back you.
That's right. And that was probably, that I didn't talk about that, but that was huge, knowing that, I had that kind of credibility.
Yeah, that's quite something. I mean, you must, how did you feel when you got that loan? I mean, that day, that moment you got the phone call or whatever, you must have been dancing on air. Oh,
absolutely. And it starts when the bank's willing to talk to you.
When they don't slam the phone down.
Right. When you send them the financials, you send them your business plan, your credentials, all of that. I mean, in the case of our bank loan, as you might imagine, it was a lot of paperwork, and that they actually are having a conversation with you. They're not saying no, because there were a few no's. But we, when I started getting no's, I thought, okay, so how do I do this? And I found a loan broker. Talking about collaborators. There was always somewhere, somehow, some help, whether it was a tool or a person helping me do what I wanted to do. So I talked to a loan broker, and the loan broker knew who would work with me, and he connected me with the right bank. And so it was like, wow, they're really talking to us. That's amazing.
That's terrific. And part of your journey, it wasn't just the intellectual journey of not wanting to be a commodity and that sort of thing. It's also an emotional journey. You became a stronger person. You became more powerful in your own life. And that was not an accident. It didn't just happen. You consciously worked on that. You made yourself this way. Am I correct in understanding that from what you said?
Yes. Yes. And absolutely. There was the path of self-discovery, of personal growth, which has been a theme here at Cycle, because without the personal growth, it's difficult to thrive and prosper in all the other dimensions in your life. I mean, you might be financially well off, you might have other successes, but the personal growth maybe makes things easier or makes things happen better or richer, for me anyway.
I think this is a really important point, because something that we got both from Eddie and from Fred before is that you're going to get a lot of no's. I mean, there's always going to be an aspect of marketing in anything you do. Even if you hire a marketing guy, you still have to market to him, or to find your partners and your collaborators, as you put them. And you had to overcome some no's, and you had to grow as a person to be able to do that. And what I want to tell the audience is, if you find yourself thinking, well, these people are all stronger than I am, or they're somehow a Superman and I'm not so strong, or I couldn't deal with that kind of rejection. I think Grace's story is really something to listen because and think about, because what she's saying is she made herself this way, at least in part. Is that right, Grace?
Yes, and I didn't stress the difficulty in my talk, because in the end, it's all a positive experience, but it wasn't easy all the time. There was a lot of pain. So, and I think we all have this experience where whatever's going on, usually it's romantic. Something's just not happening the way you want it to happen, and you're so unhappy. You're so sad or upset or mad or angry or frustrated. And I think for most of us, what happens is you reach a saturation point. You reach a point where you say to yourself, all right, I'm done feeling this way. I'm done feeling this way. I don't want that thing to control me anymore. I want to take charge of my life. I want to take charge of how I feel. And so I started to think about, well, how do I do that when I was in sort of the darkest moments of my life, if you will, pre-business and post-business, during business. And the thing that probably saved me that helped me was waking up every day and saying to myself, all right, what is it that I have control of? What is it that I have control of today? First of all, I have control over how I feel about things. And then what else? And if all you do is that every day, then I'd say you're on the way to finding that center and achieving that personal growth and becoming the better person of yourself that you can be.
That's excellent. So we have an audience that is global. We have students watching this all around the world and watching the recordings in the future and all around the world. And one of the themes that's come up is this internationalization and stepping outside of your comfort zone, stepping outside of your culture and your background, going somewhere where you're different and therefore more interesting, and maybe this opens possibilities and stuff. And you mentioned going to Paris to decompress, but you were also different. You were, I guess, interesting to those Parisians that you met. So that worked for you. You don't need to talk about your latest adventure if you don't want to, but I want to mention that you are doing something new in Peru. And what I want to ask about specifically is the emotional aspect of this. And did you have to fight a struggle with, fear of Peru? Can I really do something there? Or by this time, are you such an old hand at internationalization that Peru is easy?
Well, you got three good things I want to say about that. First of all, Paris. It brings up the conversation about affinities. One of the things I first did when I got to Paris and settled in my apartment is, and I spoke a little French. I had studied it in college. Is I went to a gallery opening of the gallery downstairs in my building, and I bought a work of art that I actually liked, and I was suddenly everybody's best friend. The gallery owner loved me, and the artists who were there and the artists whose work I had bought loved me. So I got invited to all kinds of parties and gallery openings, and I immediately got invited to be part of a little community that only grew. And so what that taught me, and I think what I kind of knew over just by nature of who I am and maybe my background, is that affinities just opens doors in all shapes and in all manner of ways. So fast forward now, I'm talking about migration and in Charleston, going from Los Angeles to Charleston. I think partly because of my background as a first-generation American and my dad kind of coming from Peru, because my parents were Peruvian, to the U.S., and then moving from New York to California, kind of moving wasn't a big deal. And so when I went to Charleston, similar to my experience in Paris, it was like, hey guys, here I am. I love being here. And I think you guys are wonderful. So, and just starting with that attitude of joining the natives, of being with the people you are and fully embracing that culture is a big step in feeling comfortable wherever you go. So, and I, in the beginning, got a lot of, this is the South. And a few times I was called a Yankee, and then I would correct them and say, no, I'm from California. I don't know if that's better or worse, but I'm from California. And, over time, people just softened. Peru, not a big deal. I love Peru. I have Peruvian heritage. I've spent a lot of time there. And the idea of being in a place that you love, I think is a good, or might love, or where you can find an affinity, whether in the people or the culture or the geography, is a good start to doing whatever it is you want to do. Maybe you want to travel and experience personal growth. Maybe you want to do what I'm thinking of doing, which is of opening a yoga studio in Peru. I'm still developing that plan. And bringing yoga, since I love yoga, and yoga was a big part of how I got centered, especially in these last few years, because it helped me slow down, and it helped me breathe, basically. Because when you're attached and you're fearful, you tend to stop breathing, and breathing's a good thing. So
some of my best friends breathe.
Exactly. It's better if they breathe than if they're not. I love the idea of migrating. I love the idea of being in new places. And today, it's just so easy to stay connected with your friends and your family, whoever it is you might leave your old place. There's no reason not to stay connected. And you get to make new friends.
It's not like a couple hundred years ago where you got on a ship and it'd take you 6 months to get there. You might never see people again. Now, you're twittering and chattering and doing all this stuff. It's like you never left.
Exactly. Well, when my dad migrated from Peru to the US, within a year, half his family joined him. So the other half stayed, but the other half ended up living with us until they found which is a typical immigrant experience. So they settled in their own homes.
Let's dial in on this affinities issue a little bit. I find this particularly interesting because another resurgent theme has been, this 7 habit thing, finding the thing you love, that mission, the thing that lights your fire, and this makes you more effective. It helps you find the strength to overcome the difficulties and so on. And framing it in terms of affinities is very interesting. And if I can channel Doug for a moment here, he didn't mention it in his talk, but I have heard him say this before and use these stories before, but he does the same thing. He doesn't use the word affinities, but he mentioned he'd travel someplace and he'd go through the yellow pages and he'd look for lawyers and real estate agents because they'll talk to anybody and they're connected. That's true, but Doug has his own affinities. There's things that he likes and that have been very door opening for him. And one of them is art. And it's interesting to me that you mentioned buying a work of art and how this opened doors for you. Who are the patrons of the arts? In most places, it's the upper crust of that particular city or the culture, that society. So if you start going to art galleries and go to showings and meet the people that are there, you pretty soon find people who are connected, who know, people who have their fingers on the pulse of that community, from the artistic all the way up to the top of the political. Another affinity that he has, that he uses, is he loves to play polo. That's not the one in the swimming pool, that's the one where you get on a horse and you run around with a large mallet and you subject yourself to unreasonable gravities and bone-crushing accidents. And this is another thing that, it's a Doug thing. Not everybody's gonna play polo, but it's something that wherever he goes, you find a polo club, and instantly it connects you with other people who share that interest. And it just so happens, this again is something, polo is not a cheap sport. You need several strings of 6 horses to play, and it again, it would connect Doug with the people he wanted to get with, who could open doors for him and get him into the president's office within a week. Now, we don't all want to go to the president's office within a week or at all. But this affinities idea, it's a way of taking the sort of abstract seventh habit of finding that thing you love and translating it into the sphere of day-to-day operations and how you connect on the street, wherever you are, and go forward. So thank you for framing it and bringing that out. I think that's an excellent mental tool for thinking about this.
And if I might add that when you are following your affinities or following your inspiration or surrounded by like-minded people, inspiration is contagious. So if you have 2 people, 3 people, 4 people in a room and they're all excited about the thing that connects you, you know, you can't even measure that, the value of that.
That's tremendous. All right, well, I am running out of questions here. You narrowed your 10 to 5. We have a little bit of time. We don't have to talk. When we're done, we're done. But is there anything else on your mind you want to share now that we've stirred up the mental juices a bit?
Sure. The one thing I might want to add to the 5 that I think I touched on a little earlier is that the part about skills for people who are out there working and are thinking about going out on their own, build your skill set and don't discount or dismiss whatever skills it is you're learning today. It all will come, it would all be useful to you in some shape or form as you go through life in whatever path you decide to take. Value your skills, things that maybe you don't even enjoy doing today. You will use them. You will use your skills is what I want to say. And if you follow your true path, you will take those skills and use them in a way that you'll enjoy using them.
That's an excellent point. And I mean, it's great if you can enjoy them, but it's also a fallback position. I tell a story about the first business I created. I was a restaurant manager working 80, 90 hours a week, and I ended up a single father. I couldn't do that anymore. I had to do something else. I had no plan B. I had nothing to fall back on. But I had skills, in particular language skills. So it was the first business I created. I went into the translation business and set up my own business, and I fed my family. And it was necessity was the mother of invention there. But
Absolutely.
you know, thank goodness I had those skills there. And it actually did turn out to be quite fun.
Fun is good.
Fun is good. Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing with us. I want to remind our viewers out there that each talk has a separate link. You need to click on the link for our next talk. That'll be Amir Adnani from Uranium Energy Corporation. He has a great story to share as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and say goodbye. And thank you, Grace, so much for being with us.
Thank you, Lobo, and thank you, everyone. Bye.